and Sharon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dan Bates, President and CEO, Greater Hamilton Chamber of Commerce, and you are on the HR Roundtable, part two of a three-part series about generational differences in the workplace. I know the last session, if you were fortunate enough to be on it, was amazing, and I'm sure part two is going to be even better. So we are thrilled to have Austin Plensler from ThyssenKrupp Bilstein with us, and he is the HR and Safety Director for them. And I think he is joining us from sunny California today,
Yes,
as he's
sir.
traveling to the different locations. So um, you will be able to ask questions during Austin's presentation. Matter of fact, he would like it to be interactive. So don't hesitate to interrupt or type something into the chat or whatever. And this is also being recorded, so it will be available later on our YouTube channel. So with that, Austin, I'm turning it over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining again. I can see some friendly faces here and some new faces as well, guys. I'm really excited to have you guys back. Again, a great start to the series. I appreciate all the feedback, all the interaction, all the communication. Let's keep that going. As you guys know, I'm not afraid to call on people, right, Jason? So I'll call on Jason and some Pam. I know Pam was chatting too. So let's keep that going. It's a really good flow. So what I want to start off with today, guys, is let's knock the rust off a little bit and let's get back into okay, what was the generations? What generations, the time zone, timing, what does this look like? We'll kind of briefly hit on the values of each generation. And then today I really want to focus on communication specifically with communicating with these different generations. How do you give feedback? How do you deliver it? What are some watch outs? What are some things that we see? But how do we ultimately make it the best for our employees or any of our friends and family as well, right? So same kind of concept we had the first time through this. So with that, let's just kind of buzz through again. Again, guys, we're primarily focusing on baby boomers. We're working our way up to Gen Z. And the reason we're doing that is just that's what you're really going to see in the workforce. As you guys recall, we did have traditionalists hanging on just a little bit, according to our data. But let's focus on these ones again. So we look at baby boomers, guys. Just remember, they're all about adventure, rapport, standing out. They're very loyal. They've seen a lot of success in their time. They're all about openness, vision, change. Some of these items that you see here, this is what they experienced when they were growing up for the baby boomers, right? So kind of resetting us on that piece. As we move our way into Gen X, think again, these are the first ones, the latchkey kids, if you will. These are the ones with dual parents working. They were left alone a lot. So what you'll see is a lot more independence. They like freedom. They like the flexibility to do what they want when they want because they had to growing up. Again, when I speak of generations, guys, I want to remember to all of us that we're discussing this is as a whole. It does not mean it's just you. So please do not take that as a personal comment. And again, it's just how the whole generation acts. So again, those are Gen Xers, right? The first ones that kind of break the mold, if you will, really forcing work-life balance. Personal life is important to them. Efficiencies are important. And then we go our way into millennials. And when we look at millennials, guys, remember flexibility, entertainment, creativity, variety, achievement, and meaning. Remember, these are the ones that our Xers and our boomers were a bit of the helicopter parents. So remember, the millennials had overwhelmingly positive feedback as they were growing up. So don't forget that. And again, guys, it's the same slide from last time. They are the least religious generation. They're the most politically independent, they're the most racially diverse and the least trusting generation. And I think that's really due to the rise of technology, the rise of social media. This is the first generation that really had it a lot, more towards the tail end of millennials, not necessarily the beginning part of the millennials. However, that 1980 to 1985, they did live it through a different age gap, right? So keep that in mind for our millennials. Then as we get into the newest one, which is Gen Z, very similar to millennials. However, they really do value mental health, sustainability, all types of sustainability. I think for us, we always think environmental. Yes, that's important. However, it's also going to be a lot of different sustainability initiatives that we see across the spectrum. Digital connectivity, authenticity, work-life balance, and individualism. Interestingly enough, Gen Z is the most financially cautious generation. If you guys remember last time, this is one that kind of caught some people off guard. Well, my kids aren't doing that. They can't be. I would ask you to take a little bit of a deeper look and really start asking these folks about what do they think about their future. You have to remember, guys, a lot of these guys can't afford houses today. It's hard to get interest rates that are even competitive. They're very expensive. So they're relying on maybe more public transportation, or Ubers, or they're living in an apartment. So they've been really forced into that financially cautious piece of this. They are the most tech savvy generation. They have now overtaken the millennials for that. Again, that's all they've ever known. They don't know what a rotary phone is. They don't know what dial-up is. They don't know what a phone is that's connected and you can't get on unless your sister's on. You can hear the conversations, the floppy disks, right? CDs, these kind of different things. So very tech savvy. They are the multicultural diversity is one of the biggest things for them. And the reason they see that is because of the connectivity. They're able to interact with people that are different than they are, rightfully or wrongfully so. And you'll see that a lot through the rise of technology. They can see a lot more than previous generations. And similar to the millennials, they are the least politically trusting generation. If you recall last time, guys, these guys were bombarded with different avenues of technology that you start seeing we call it the fake news era, where you see a lot of conflicting reports from the news. The trust in mainstream media is really, really low amongst this group. They're relying on alternative sources such as long form podcasts or any of these maybe you call TikTok quick hits, minute, 2 minute long videos of a lot of different opinions. So kind of all ties back to that tech savvy piece of this generation. Okay. So that's really just setting the stage, knocking the rust off. It's stuff we talked about last time, really in a nutshell. I know we went a lot deeper in that. So now we really want to talk about the goals and motivations and challenges of these folks. What does that mean and how does that set the table for communication? So when we think about boomers, guys, again, feel free to interject if you'd like. Boomers, the biggest thing with them, if you think about how they were raised in this really traditional, we'll call it corporate, you climb the ladder type organizations, they really want to be recognized. They like to have the ability to shine by receiving public recognition. Again, not all boomers like this. I'm saying in general. If you do an award or you receive a service award, you've been here this many years, you're the employee of the month, you are the best employee for the year. This really, really hits home for the baby boomers. They love fitting in with the company vision mission. If you look at your most tenured employees today, I would probably bet most of them are going to be of the boomer generation, not just because of their age, but because of their dedication and what they were raised with, right? Is they always want to be committed to something. They really want to be part of the company through thick and thin. And we'll talk about why that's important with different generations. They tend to be anxious to please. I think this is one that might throw you a little bit. And the reason I say that is when you think of baby boomers, I think sometimes we think of World War II. And we think, well, when they come home and they're these grueling, folks. But however, that was more of the traditionalists. So you got to remember, those are maybe the parents of the boomers, because the boomers age gap does start in 1946. So keep that in mind. They are very anxious to please, and that falls in line with I want to be part of the solution with the big vision, the company vision. And you guys probably know this, and this would probably be true in most of your organizations. Baby boomers do not have a problem working really long hours and going the extra mile if recognized. If you think about some of even the movies or the historical documents or the historical documentaries, you see people working 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., whatever it is to get the job done, right? You kind of think of those traditional environments. So I want to pause here quickly and just ask the team, as you guys think about your baby boomers and the workplace, are these some things that are kind of ringing true? I'll start with Jason. What do you think?
I think that resonates, I'll say, with my parents. Recognition is a huge thing, and I think it at the time brought a lot more prestige by having that recognition. Whereas I think younger generations might feel, I'd rather be compensated, or I would rather have that lead to an opportunity more so than that recognition, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Cindy, we said yes. Please tell me more.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm on the phone,
Oh,
so
yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how to manipulate my phone. I'm a boomer, and that totally resonates with me, although I'm on the cusp, and I was also latchkey, so I have a little bit of both. But Totally. I've worked so many jobs where I've worked the longest hours you can imagine, and recognition made it all worthwhile. So, and I see in my son, total opposite. So he's pretty much, no, it's going to be work-life balance. Why do you work so hard? You know, it's not going to lead to anything. So that's a total different attitude.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate that. That's what I want you guys to do. Cindy. It's a perfect example of like, yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, I agree with that. But it's cool too that you're kind of this tweener, right? You understand the latchkey piece of this, and that's really fascinating when you can start identifying with two different generations. That's great. Really great to hear. All right. Let's move on. So that this is really the goal and motivation for boomers in the workplace, right? So when we think about this in terms of challenges, what does this mean? So again, might get a little uncomfortable, Cindy, but I'd love to hear what you think here, right? So we're thinking about some of the challenges as an overarching, right? So again, when you start talking about these things, they might be uncomfortable with conflict or that fall in line mentality, right? This is what we do. This is how we do it. How dare you step outside the line? I'm uncomfortable with it because I need to follow a hierarchy because that's what I've always known, right? And it's not a bad thing. It's just saying sometimes when you have conflict, whether it be up, down, laterally within the organization, maybe you feel a bit uncomfortable with that. They may resent demands of newer technology, so they may not like the newer demands of these technologies that we're seeing, right? If it's I really prefer having this structured methodology of how I communicate or how I actually use this technology because it's tried and true and it's always worked for me. When you have disruption as far as either if it's streamlining or maybe simply just flipping systems, that may be a big piece for the boomers, right? And it's not a bad thing. It's just because I've always used it this way and a bit of the wisdom in making sure that happens. It's actually super interesting when you ever go through a system transition or you're transitioning big data sources into different data sources. It's actually suggested to keep a baby boomer on board with you, especially a long tenured one, because they know the ins and outs of those processes and the system so well. What they'll be able to do is help the younger generations troubleshoot. Hey, did you think about this? Hey, did you think about that? Hey, did you think about this? Because that actually helps the younger generation to put technology. And the best part about that is you're bringing the baby boomer along with you. So they're going to be least resistant to the changes that you're making because they're part of the project team, right? That's a good best practice, in my opinion, to really utilize the baby boomers' knowledge and wisdom and the years of experience there. At times, boomers may put process ahead of results. Again, I think you're seeing that tie back together with the fall in line mentality. I think sometimes, and I know I've seen it in my career. Nope, this is how we've always done it. It's been successful. Why would we ever change? And I don't really care what the results look like because it will work. I promise. However, if you show results of it'll streamline efficiency by 20%, it might do this, it might do that. You really have to make sure you're engaging with your boomers to tell them the why, the bigger picture, how does it tie back to the company vision? Why ultimately do we even want to do this, right? It's one of the big pieces here when you think about the boomer piece. One thing to note, and we'll get a little bit more into this later, boomers can be put off by the informality of instant communication. I think that's a big one for the millennials or Gen Zs on the phone. Quick pings or quick, hey, what about this? Hey, what about that? Hey, are you available now? Or can you do this? Those things for boomers, the way they were raised with a lot of processes and structure, it might catch them off guard. Not saying they don't like it or they're resistant to it, but it may not be the perfect mode of communication for baby boomers. We'll talk a little bit more on what does that mean then also? Like what is the best way to approach baby boomers? I do have that on the slide. We'll talk more about it. And sometimes boomers are leery of those who see things differently. And that kind of ties back to the challenging of the norms. So if you guys recall 5, 6, 7 years ago, the biggest issues we had in the workplace is traditionally between the millennials and the baby boomers, right? Because millennials like to flip thing on its head. Let's try it this way. Let's try this. Let's make it more efficient. Let's break this. Let's break that. Elon Musk is famous for saying, what is it? Move fast and break things, something along this nature, right? And that would really, really, really hinder a relationship between a millennial and a baby boomer, right? So just keep that in mind with the boomer challenge. So I'll pause quickly. Any of my baby boomers, or do you think I'm being fair? Do you think I'm hitting it on the head? Do you think I missed something? Does anybody want to chat about that? Or you could say it's a family member that's a baby boomer you agree with as well.
Yeah, I'll comment on that. Today, we were using so many different technologies in our house. I ended up on my phone because, well, long story short, but anyway, my husband has decided he can't use the laptop. He's not really sure how to turn it on. And so he's going to be buying a tower, and I'm hoping they still make them. So I don't know. They're pretty soon there aren't going to be any more towers. So anyway, he said, I got to buy a tower. I don't know how to use anything else.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. It's perfect. Yeah, that's a good example. A good example. Great. Anybody else in the audience have an inkling here? Okay.
Austin, I think it's interesting, just the challenge of the boomers. It's Pam. Uh, from the standpoint of some of the things, it kind of ties into the instant communication and not comfortable with the informality and kind of a fall in line. I think the blending of the boomers and the younger generation is the fact that I think the boomers are very uncomfortable with how much more freely the younger generations blend their work life in communications and in meetings and in stuff like that, to where I think the boomers were very traditionally could separate work and personal life, and they did not mix. You didn't necessarily have to discuss um, the challenges of stuff at home, and your manager really didn't need to hear about it, and your teammates didn't need to know what was going on. Where in today's workplace, it's simultaneously like you're living under the same roof with some people. So and that's just the way generations have evolved, because the more people know and share and commiserate, and then they bond, and that's the way these generations, I think, differ from the boomers.
That's Pam. I mean, you nailed it on the head. I think you bring up a very, very important point. I know, especially being HR folks, right? You see that a lot now, which you probably didn't see in the past. And it's an important point to bring up. And this is another watch out for millennials or Gen Z, rightfully or wrongfully so. Sometimes we get things that we now know that is more personal than it ever should be. And I don't think it's due to malicious nature by any stretch of the imagination, but we know more about our employees than we ever have ever in the history of time, right? I think that's an interesting part. And again, rightfully or wrongfully so, I think you could take both sides of that coin. That's when mental health really comes into play. And you guys have to remember, baby boomers were ones that were taught of that stays at home. That does not make it its way to work. You do not discuss these things. You do not use certain language that is a little more loose, we'll say, in the workplace that maybe the millennials and Gen Z have brought in, slang and or other words that I think we can all use our imaginations, because that was a big no-no, because you would look less professional, right? It was always like this professional polish you have to have. Think of clothing. I think clothing is a really important one too. Back in the day, everybody wore suits and dresses and all these things and high heels and nice shoes all the time. And nowadays, if you don't offer jeans, like what are you doing? Right? I mean, I think even having a collared shirt on sometimes is considered too professional. So it's super fascinating, Pam, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because that is a big deal too. I think presentation of this. And we saw a massive shift in these cultures, especially at the tech companies. That's probably the biggest point in time where you saw the shift of just the professionalism and dress code, was when you had the Googles and the Amazons and the Nvidias and the come into play. And these guys are wearing sneakers and shorts and a shirt, maybe a cutoff shirt sometimes, right? They're just kind of coming into work and doing their jam, right? So that's a really good piece of that puzzle too.
Austin, I'd like to
Sure.
make a comment as a boomer. You know, and I think the adjustment to that can be difficult because, I know myself, there's like, I will let you take that conversation so far when it's personal. And then it's like, okay, we've gone far enough. And that's kind of hard to overcome. But the other thing that I think is a piece, the boomers have recently probably had to adjust and adapt to more changes than any other generation in a short period of time.
Oh,
So, I would like to think I'm one of those who adjust pretty well to technology and all of that. But I know there are plenty of boomers. There's another piece here that is critical. When they can't adjust or aren't willing to, there's also that feeling of being left out or obsolescence. Boomers are being that if they don't feel comfortable in adjusting, then they feel like that they are no longer relevant. And I think that that's an issue in the workplace too, that there still is a lot of knowledge and everything that the boomers have. And I think sometimes they're afraid to speak up because I don't think they think that people will respect that experience.
Wonderful, Dan. I think that's a really, really wonderful point, and that's a really nice segue we have for a later our last series that we have. We talk more about rewards and recognitions and what to do with some of the baby boomers as they continue to inch closer to retirement. And I think that's a really important part, is to make sure when you guys are in a room and you have a diverse age group, if you will, or different generations in there, we always allow our boomers to speak. I think what you'll find in most organizations are your boomers are probably ones who don't speak a whole lot, but if they do, everybody listens. And that's an important part of this, right? We have to make sure we're falling on the wisdom. If we are not allowing our baby boomers to speak in the organization, we really need to start thinking about how do we give them the avenue to talk? Because Dan, you're absolutely right. This generation has gone from, I mean, if you think about the age, right? You just exited World War II. Now we have AI that can do stuff for us and everything in between in their lifetime. That is a fascinating amount of change for any generation, right? And just realize they saw all these things, and we got to really harness the baby boomers and their wisdom and their knowledge. And we do talk more about putting baby boomers into mentorship roles, especially on the way out of organizations, to offload the information they have, but also to teach and mentor previous generations. We'll jump more into that too. So thank you, Dan. Perfect point. All right. So those are our boomers. So let's hop into Gen X. I think you guys probably knew where I was going with this one. This is really to maintain independence, right? This is the biggest piece. The first generation to coin the work-life balance in the workplace. They naturally question authoritative figures or authority figures, right? They're the first generation to start kind of breaking the mold a little bit. They possess strong technical skills that are more independent than the prior generations, and they exceed expectations and deliver on results when left alone. Not saying you just put them in an office and lock them away forever, but you really need to let this generation kind of do their thing, especially nowadays, because they're getting to the point where they may be staring down the barrel of retirement, and we really need to make sure that we're allowing these items for the Gen Xers. And again, it gets back to the fact they're latchkey kids. It gets back to the fact that they have a ton of time to think. If you think of the onset of, we'll say, grunge music, you start seeing all the pushback on politics or the social norms. These are the guys that really started breaking that down. So with that being said, I want to open it up a little bit to the Xers and say, Austin, you're a crazy person, or am I hitting you right on the spot? And you don't have to say if you're an Xer, by the way. You can say, yes, my Xer friends or family feel this way as well. Call someone. Let's do that. Aaron, what do you think?
I think pretty accurate. I would definitely, I'm a little more of like a Gen X. So I'm not sure about naturally questioning authority figures necessarily. I don't feel like I necessarily do that. So maybe it's just my personality. But I would say, yeah, more independent, and definitely exceed expectations and want to really deliver results. So that does sound similar.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. Good. All right. And now let's get into those are the goals and motivations of Xers, guys. Again, in 5 bullet points. There's lots more here, but just to kind of cover the name of time. Some of the struggles or challenges that Gen X may feel, they can struggle with impatience and skepticism. They do not like to be micromanaged. So please, for everything holy, do not micromanage this group of people. Accepts and expects high-tech systems to be current. Again, first generation to start realizing efficiencies and efficiency gains is something that you'll have with Xers that they will actually prefer to have the most up to date. And you would naturally think that'd be more of your millennials or your Gen Z, which is also true. However, X is the first one to really push this within the workplace. They learn very quickly. They like informality and they're energized by the stopping for a quick chat to discuss topics. So, Austin, what does that mean? This is the first generation where you're able to stop by and say, hey, do you have a quick time to chat about this topic or whatever it may be? And they're okay with the conversation taking 20 or 30 minutes to get resolution. And really what you're seeing is with that mentality, you can see how that forms the millennials and the Gen Z as far as like, let's get it done now. I'm not patient. Let's just go do it. And let's get it done. It really started with the Xers with this informality and breaking the mold, if you will. If we got to schedule a meeting and the meeting's got to be in a week, and then after the meeting, we have to have a follow-up meeting. Gen X was really the first generation to say, no, hold on a second. I'm just going to stop by your office. Let's whiteboard it really quickly. And then let's kind of put next steps together. And maybe I'll follow up with you next week, right? That informality piece is a big deal. And now I will tell you, and we'll get to more in a second about this, you have to be very careful with your baby boomers when you do these things. Xers, millennials, and Gen Z can do that pretty efficiently, but we have to make sure we're managing our baby boomers and we're following some of the process they like to do. So with that, Aaron, what do you think about this slide?
I definitely would say I don't like to be micromanaged, so I can understand that. And I do like to collaborate and kind of quickly chat to discuss topics. So that does sound very similar. So yeah, I mean, I'm, I'm just trying to think of some of the other people. I think there's, that are in that same generation that I work with. And I would say, yeah, the informality and, quickly adapting definitely fits.
Good, good, perfect. That's good to hear. It's always good to see you bounce off it. And by the way, guys, feel free to interrupt me if you're like, no, Austin, you're a crazy person. I don't think that's really true. Let's talk about it and see why, right? Good. Thank you, Aaron. All right. So now let's hop into millennials. So we got through boomers and Xers. Now we're on the millennials. The biggest piece here for millennials, and I'll speak as one, is you will need to create meaning. So the first global centric generation due to rapid growth of the internet. It's the second most educated generation, and that so you guys now know that Gen Z is the most educated generation. It's the most team-centric generation. We can thank our helicopter parents for that. Resilient to navigating change, and they're quick learners. And then they appreciate diversity and inclusion of different folks from different backgrounds in their lives, right? So the biggest piece here is why are we doing it and what's the end goal? I would tell you that I would argue that that's probably most generations, but this is one where you really started seeing a demand for it and saying, I don't understand why you're doing it, so you better tell me or I may not work here. And I'll tell you why that's important here in a couple of slides as well. So with that, let me stop here and let's talk about this a little bit with some of the millennials on the phone, or if you know a millennial, feel free to share it. Jason, you have elder millennial in your title. What do you think, Jason? What do you think about this, buddy?
I think this hits the nail on the head right here. Definitely, I think I'm wondering if because of the helicopter parents, I don't think that my parents were helicopter parents, but I do think there were other adults in my life that were helicopter mentors or adults. So I think it really challenged us to kind of question everything in life. I also think that we were maybe the first generation to have our bubble popped of what we thought the world was and what is actually going on. And I think it's kind of forced us to embrace a lot of things with caution, if that makes sense.
No, that's a perfect point. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think the helicopter parent piece created the bubble, right? Hey, stay away. This is my perfect child, and don't talk to, or I'm going to shield you from everything. Which is like you say, like that's like kind of what parents should do, right? But really, our families kind of did this. Again, I think the nice positive outcome is the team-centric piece. You'll find millennials work really, really well together in teams. because that's all we've ever seen. We've always been on teams our whole life, Jason, right? I mean, you can name it from sports to extracurricular activities, whatever it may be, we're always together. And I think that's a piece where millennials sometimes have a hard time getting away and just kind of like, hey, just let me do it. Let me figure it out. But again, that's more of the Xers there. So I agree with you, Jason. I think everything you said was absolutely spot on. Any other millennials want to share before I move on to some of our challenges? Get ready, Jason. We've got our challenges coming. Okay. So as we get into some of the challenges with millennials, this is funny to probably laugh at. As a generation as a whole, remember that, Jason, sometimes millennials require supervision and structure a little bit more than the previous generations, especially compared to Gen X. The reason that is sometimes you see that millennials have this. I've always been told I'm doing right. Okay, keep going, keep going, keep going. You're getting coached by maybe your helicopter parents or the teams you're on. So when you get rid of that bubble, if you will, around them and you kind of let them go, sometimes you'll find millennials have a hard time kind of getting back to center and saying, well, where do I need to go now? And it's interesting to think about the previous generation never had an issue with that. And that previous generation is the one who raised the millennials most of the time, if you think about the age grab. So it's kind of interesting to see how those two generations are touching and are the parents of the millennials and how that kind of reverberates. As compared to previous generations being X and the boomers, it is true millennials tend to possess weaker verbal skills. A lot of our HR folks will also agree with this as you go through interviews. You kind of know what you're getting out of a boomer and an Xer, quite polished, ready to go, on point. Sometimes the millennials, you'll get them in an interview as an example, and they might just kind of deviate from the conversation. They'll kind of go off into Narnia land. You got to reel them back into what we're talking about. And that is just due to the primarily the technological increase that we've had, the attention spans of which millennials have too. I'm speaking at a very high level, guys. So I'm not saying you specifically, but as a generation, I think we can all laugh a little bit and say that's about true. Millennials do have this free agent attitude, which is very, very much different than the boomers. I will be with this company for 35 years. I will get my pension. I will retire a blank, right, from whatever company that is. Whereas millennials say, what do you offer me and why should I join your team? Think about that. I like to use the NFL reference. When you have free agents that leave to go to different teams, how are you going to convince them to stay? And this is, again, the first generation to really, really push that to a really high degree. Xers started doing it. However, Xers tend to have a little more called loyalty to the brand or the company. However, millennials just kicked the door wide open and said, you better tell me why I'm here, what's my career path, how much you're going to pay me, and what's my 5, 10, 15-year outlook look like, right? And that was another big issue when you saw the millennials enter the workforce with Gen X and the baby boomers, because they're taking the attitude of, who are you to tell me, right? I've been around 15 years, 20 years, 25 years in the company. Why are you demanding all this? You need to fall in line, right? So you kind of saw these clashing of the heads, especially as these two generations started figuring each other out. And a big reason for that, guys, is that next bullet. Millennials tend to have really big expectations. They usually have a high self-esteem and they have this sense of entitlement. I could tell you as a millennial, being knocked down a couple of times has been very good for me in my career. And I think it helps you get better. And I think every generation goes through it. However, the millennials do have a higher self-esteem. So it's a bigger hit to the ego, because there is something to be said about, you haven't been around here long enough, buddy. You better learn, you can earn your stripes, which is something where I think the millennials in the last probably 5-ish years, 5, 10-ish years, have really started understanding that piece, and you started seeing the millennials level out or mellow out a little bit compared to when they first entered the workforce. I just think you're seeing that now with Generation Z. They're kind of going through that same cyclical cycle that the millennials did as well. And of course, millennials are very tech dependent. They cannot stand outdated systems or processes. If you want to drive a millennial out, show them a piece of paper. I'm joking. Obviously, you got to pay for your companies, but that's one of the things that you have to make sure they have. And they are very challenged when they have to go to maybe an outdated or maybe a tried and true process that has worked. It's tough for them. I think an interesting point of this is if you look around say the federal government or any state government job, and you see and again, I'm making broad stroke comments here, tends to be pretty inefficient, tends to take forever to do anything. I would challenge you to say, I wonder how much of their workforce is actually millennials or Gen Z. It'd be very interesting to see that data. I don't have it in front of me. I'm just saying, in general, that would be something that you have to just watch out for. Okay, so with that, I'm going to pause. My millennials, do you guys agree?
I definitely feel like the positive affirmations are something that have helped me along in my career, whether it was a profession as being a professional or being an actor. I remember one director who only gave constructive, often negative critiques, and you know, you're trying to get to the, I guess, better understanding. So if you can't do this and you can't do this, it's like, well, what can I do? So I know a lot of yeah, I would say a little bit of positive affirmations goes a long way with me just in general.
Mhm.
Just because I think only the critiques it confuses me as to, well, what path do you want me on? Right. And I don't know if that, again, my parents were not helicopter parents, but um I identify that in the workforce, and that's something that I kind of need. I don't know if that's true for millennials. Um
That's a good question. So let's ask the group, right? So, hey Pam, I'm gonna pick on you. I think Jason's question is super interesting, and I don't want to share my thoughts as an HR guy, but what are your thoughts is what Jason asked about the positive affirmations? I mean, how often do you believe you're giving it to millennials versus Xers versus boomers?
Oh, much more frequent. It is, it's almost to the point to where you need to realize that it's just part of what makes them tick in a lot of ways. And I find it, I have one example in my head of an employee that I'm thinking of, is the fact that there is a constant, like, and it might just be this one individual, but it is a constant, what do you think? You know, they constantly are asking, like, are you okay with, I'm gonna do this. Are you okay with it? You know, type of thing, where it's like, you know what, just once I want you to do it, and then I'll let you know how I feel about it. Type of thing. So there is a definite need for, I guess, a constant kind of reassurance in their minds that they're doing the right thing. Where I think as a Gen X person, you know, I never really asked for feedback from my managers because they were usually a typical boomer, where you better have crossed your T's and dotted your I's and made sure it was locked down solid before you even brought it to them, type of thing. So I think maybe there's a sense of that helicopter relationship, where that there's that sense of approval and making sure and checking in, am I good, am I not, then I'll pivot, type of thing with the millennials.
Yep. No, I
So
agree.
Austin, I'm going to chime in here.
Sure.
Um,
Dan,
and
are you
unfortunately,
going to yell at me, Dan?
oh, sorry, Pam.
Are you going
Um,
to yell at me?
no. No, I'm going to reveal my stripes a little bit, I guess. You know, it's challenging for me because I expect people to, you know, take control, take responsibility, and do their job. Okay. So when I look at that, they want to, you know, have a free agent attitude, to me, that aligns, you know, with my thinking of make a decision and do it. You know, if it's wrong, it can always be fixed, but just make a decision. Um, and you know, so it's difficult for me to kind of see both. You know, why that constant reinforcement is needed when, you know, I've brought somebody in to do a particular job and I want them to take total control of that role and make their own decisions. So, you know, when you say the millennials want to have like a free agent attitude, but yet at the same time, they need that constant, you know, that's just very difficult.
It contradicts itself, man, right?
Yes, yes.
Why would that be? If you're this hot shot free agent, you shouldn't need to be told or have positive affirmations all the time, right? Because it's like, why, how can that be both at the same time, right? And I think that's it's a good point you bring up, because millennials will jump ship more than any other generation before their time. There's no doubt. You can look at anybody, any millennial on LinkedIn. I promise you'll find it. But it's interesting with that positive affirmation piece, right? And I think getting back to Jason's point, I think if you think about how you were raised and of which bubble, how big your bubble was, or even if you had a bubble, really kind of determines that for millennials. But I will tell you, Pam, I agree with you wholeheartedly. In HR, I am more than not giving positive affirmations almost always to millennials than I ever do with Xers or boomers. It is what it is, right? I'm not saying rightfully or wrongfully so. It helps them and gets them back on track and off they go. But to your point, Dan, I can see how that can be confusing. And I think there's a couple of things we'll talk to you guys in previous slides and even the next section of how do we combat that? Like, how do you have both be true and how do you handle both at the same time? We'll discuss a little bit more about that, some techniques we can use, especially the millennials having these different pieces of the puzzle. Good. Okay. So let's get back to Gen Z. You'll see my comments are kind of funny. Create meaning again, because when you look at the analysis and a lot of the studies that have been done on Gen Z, similar to millennials, I know millennials will roll our eyes and say they're not us, but at the end of the day, they've seen more of what we've seen than any other previous generations. So the thing for Gen Z, though, is you got to start working on practical impact to the business of the world. Millennials can operate on show me why it's important to the company and what's the end goal. However, Gen Z is now, since they're so interconnected, is that how is this going to impact the world? What are we going to do to make the world a better place? What are we going to do how does this business fit into what I believe the world should be or what it should look like? That's a new step for a lot of businesses and a lot of companies. I think you're seeing a lot of the rise of the sustainability efforts, such as, hey, we're going to reduce our carbon footprint, we're going to reduce our waste to landfill, we're going to reduce whatever it may be, because at this point, Gen Z wants to connect to something beyond just making a bottom line or increasing the top line of budgets, right? And rightfully or wrongfully so, this is what's coming. So it's like you have to kind of understand what does that mean and how do you look at that. I will tell you, a couple of my folks on my team at both locations went to a recruiting fair, a college recruiting fair. And it's the first time, the last couple of times they went was the amount of questions they got of what's your sustainability practices and what are you doing to make the environment better? I can tell you back in the day when I used to recruit fairs, never a question. It was always about how much you can pay me, what's my career path look like, your traditional questions. And now more and more and more with this generation, we're seeing what are you doing to make the world a better place? So it's an interesting dynamic. It shifts a lot of the way companies thinks to really start thinking about, hey, should we really start thinking about maybe doing some of this stuff? And I don't want to take us down a political route. I'm not trying to, but that's just something where you have to kind of think in the back of your brain. If this is what these people want, then you got to think about it. Does it make sense? Yes or no? And I'm not going to make a decision for your specific company or organization, but just keep that in the back of your mind as you guys are continuing to work through this crazy world we live in. Ensure seamless tech integration with quick, intuitive platforms. Again, you see it with the Xers, you see it kind of mold in the millennials. Gen Z is pushing even farther. A perfect example of this is, what do you mean you don't use AI in the workplace? How can you not use AI? What are you doing? Why would you not use AI? I'm using AI to write my papers. And they may not admit that, but some of these items with AI, how are you doing this? How are you making quicker, faster? How do you get more data at your fingertips so we can make decisions even faster than before? And that's one thing that's really going to have to push the boomers a little bit, and we have to kind of slow them down a little bit and make sure both generations in the workplace are able to talk with each other and have those conversations. They're motivated by skill acquisition, and it's an adaptability for future-proof careers. Also, that's a lot of words. What does that mean? This generation, outside of having this free agent attitude, I think the millennials, and Jason, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, we want to build the resume to get to the top. You start to see more of this ladder lattice type movement. Gen Z is saying, okay, that might be important. However, I want to have skills that I can transfer between all industries and that I can have as my baseline and then be able to transfer it however I want. So that way it allows me to be an individual contributor if I want, or if I want to take the manager route, I have it too. So now they're not looking at jobs necessarily. They're looking at what skills can I get from that job, which is a big deal because the millennials weren't quite there when they started entering the workplace. So think about that as well for you Gen Zers. What can I provide to them from a skill acquisition standpoint, then kind of convince them of a job, which is, again, polarizingly different thought of how you approach this generation. Again, Gen Z is now demanding, that's a big, strong word, demanding flexibility as the baseline to preserve mental health and burnout. You guys got to remember when we talked last time, this is the first time any generation has not been able to get away from social media or bullies or where their mental health has been put through the ringer a bit more than everybody else. I think if you think about the boomers and Xers, they could leave school. Let's just use school as an example. You could leave school at home, leave school at school, leave the bullies at school, and come home to maybe we call it maybe a more safe environment with your family. And this is the generation now that you can't really get away from it because your phone could be pinging, somebody could be bullying you even from their house, and ultimately create burnout. Rightfully or wrongfully so. I know I had some people say, well, also, if they just put their phone down and turn it off, they wouldn't have that option. Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think that's an interesting technique. But in order to know how addicted our entire population is to phones, these guys are seeing the most mental health. That's why they're demanding it more than the millennials even did. Diversity of background thoughts are a must. With them having so much information at their fingertips, you have to make sure you're getting them in diverse groups of folks. So what you'll notice is Gen Z really likes to work with global teams. So if you think about a team from Germany, Sweden, if you think about it from the UK, they love having these different trains of thoughts in the room with them together because it helps them, again, acquire those skills or get the skill acquisition to help develop them as they go further along. And the internet has also allowed them to see a lot of different cultures a lot quicker at their fingertips. Okay. All right. And some of the challenges with these guys being Gen Z, because of the interconnectivity, mental health struggles are very prevalent. I just discussed that with you guys a little bit. They have unrealistic expectations of company culture, and that is true. And you guys will notice that as they start entering your workforce, they expect the company to do all these different things. So you guys heard me talk about sustainability a little bit. It's that on steroids. They say, well, why can't I take a 20-minute lunch in a pod that I can sleep in? Why can't I go do this? And why can't I go do this? Sometimes these expectations of company cultures are a bit out of control, and you have to kind of dial them in and say, hey, that's cool for like a Google, but hey, we're in the Midwest. I mean, we can have cool things. However, this is kind of what life is, right? We have to kind of help them through that. They, again, demanding amounts of communication and feedback from your manager. Dan, if you think millennials need a lot of positive affirmations, get ready. And then struggle to balance with digital distractions. This generation, you will see them on their phone a lot, and you'll see them on their phone a lot at work. And that's one that as HR folks, I know Pam, you could probably resonate with this, is that you have to keep in mind they're the most tech savvy and most efficient generation ever. So when you see them on their phone, their task could be done faster than you've ever seen it done, but they're just kind of sitting there scrolling. So you have to kind of balance the efficiency versus are you just slacking off and you're on Twitter or X, whatever it's called nowadays. And then last but not least, the extreme transparency will really kind of divert these guys if you don't have it for the authority and the hierarchy. So this is one that's a really big deal. Sometimes you see companies say, we need to make a profit of X. This generation saying, well, why do you have to make a profit of X? What does that mean? Why is that important? How is that impacting the world? How's that impacting the other people we work with? How does that impact my coworkers? And they're asking all these questions, and the extreme transparency piece is pushed to the limit where maybe it's too far, right? Like you can't share everything all the time, and they don't really understand that piece. So you have to tell them why. And this is how companies or businesses run. Whereas you never really had to do that. Even with the millennials, they got it, they understood it. But this generation specifically will ask for that extreme transparency, and you have to kind of dial it back for them and say, hey, this is what you can ask, this is what you can't ask, and here's a little bit of the why, and kind of educate them on that piece. Okay, so with that, anybody on the phone have Gen Zs in their workforce, or do they have maybe kids, family members? And does this resonate with you and your interactions with them? Mike, I like your picture. You want to chat on this?
No, I'm good, but I'm enjoying the conversation.
Okay, good. Fantastic. Anybody else? All right. All right, let's keep it going. So now we're gonna get into the strategies, guys, and kind of what do we need to do when we communicate with these different generations. So here you're seeing the boomers. I know we kind of alluded to it briefly. Let's kind of talk through it. The key takeaway with boomers, they love systematic approaches. So what that means is if you communicate with them, make sure you have either scheduled time on their calendar or they know of what we're gonna do, right? So, hey, I need to have a one-on-one with you. I'm gonna schedule bi-weekly every Tuesday from 1 to 2 p.m. Here's the topics we're gonna cover. That is golden for boomers. You got to make sure you're doing these structured approaches and they will thrive in that environment. And it says, I put this in here as a bit of a joke. They have evolved from inter-office memos, guys. That are not like, you don't have to give them paper copies. And that's a stereotype of the boomers. But what we need to keep in mind is the systematic approach works really, really well with them. And they have adapted to technology. It's the truth. And that we just need to make sure that we follow more of a structured approach when we communicate with our boomers. Informal, scheduled, personal interaction. I told you about this. They love well-planned agendas. And if you're unable to have face-to-face interactions, send them a well-informed email that educates them on the topic. So take an extra second in your email instead of kind of firing off something really quick and assuming they understand. Maybe just outline it a little bit more, maybe in a structured bulleted format, something like this, to where you can give the why, what's happening, how does it connect to the company, and then off you go. That is preferred amongst boomers. Okay. I'll pause here. Cindy or Dan, what do you guys think about this one?
That was how I was trained, and that was expected of us. So that was one of the first things I was taught going into business was the interoffice memo and getting it perfect. I remember I had to redo it several times till my boss thought it was appropriate and perfect to send out. It was like the memo was more important than what was in it. And there were all types of formal scheduled meetings, kind of time wasters, but that was the way it worked. And you did have to build agendas. I still think that's a good way to work with a business, though, because you need to know where you're going. If it's an update type of meeting or a communication meeting, people want to know what they're there for. But that doesn't replace what you're talking about with all these informal meetings. That's different. Let's see. Face to face was still really important. A lot of like my son is a Z, and they don't even understand face to face. It's all on the phone. Most of it's texting. The kids I worked with at the university, they didn't even you wouldn't call them. You would absolutely text them for information or to update them, and they just didn't understand picking up the phone and calling anyone.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. I appreciate that, and I think you bring up a good point, right? This is how this is how the world worked. Like this is what I learned, so this is why it's important. And I like your well-planned agendas. I think that's one where the millennials and the Z's specifically can get a lot better at. There's times where you have meetings, you're just meeting about something, and next thing you go on a tangent route, and next thing you like, what are we even here for? Oh yeah, we should probably have had a well-planned agenda to make sure we get through this and have a timekeeper, things like that. So again, getting back and making sure we utilize the boomers to help the newer generations along. Good.
Well, I will put in
my
I'll put in my 2 cents here.
Sure.
This is how I was brought up in corporate America. However, I've evolved. I don't like unnecessary meetings. I think if you can't say what you're going to say within an hour, then I don't care. And I like ongoing open door communication all day long. So, if somebody has something to say, come and interrupt me and say it. So, maybe I'm a bad boomer. I'm also a late boomer. So, but it's I guess I've evolved from the structure and everything because it can become so onerous that you don't get anything done, and I know even with a small team, sometimes getting everybody together at the same time can be near impossible. So I would rather, for a creativity perspective, if somebody has an idea, when it pops in your head, come and tell me.
That's perfect. No, I appreciate that, Dan, and I agree, especially with you being on the edge there with the Xers. It doesn't shock me. And I think the important part is they have evolved, and that means yes, guys, boomers have evolved. They're able to adapt. They're still working. They're doing a great job. They're still producing great results. But you just remember what they saw and how it came through it. So when we interact with them, and Dan, it's a really good point you brought up. Is like, yes, guys, we've evolved. However, having these face-to-face interactions is good. And back to your point, Cindy, I also agree. Having face-to-face interactions, you can get so much more done. You can cover so much more ground than through a text message or a Teams call necessarily. Just you can have that chance to bounce a bunch of ideas off each other. Okay, hopefully you guys like my graphic on this page. Shout out to the Xers, the originator of the email. Okay, they tend to take in information on their own time or their own schedule. They like ad hoc conversations about work issues, as we already mentioned. They love talking projects with little detail, make it their own without direction. Again, just reiterating, they hate micromanagers. And the tip here is show Xers how they fit into the bigger picture of the organization by allowing them the opportunity to take this ball of wax, whatever it is, and make it their own. I will ask you guys, and I'm sure you guys have seen this in the Xers, you can literally say, hey, I need to go from point A to point B. I don't really know how to get to point B. Can you help me and give me an answer in 2 weeks or a week or whatever it is? Watch what happens. It is a fascinating thing to watch what happens. And they will come back with an outline. This is exactly what I need to do. This is how we get there. Here's all the resources you need. This is the end goal. It'll be totally done, ready to rock and roll and almost roll out. It's a really fascinating item to watch. It's the one of the few generations that is the generation that can do it the best. If you ask a millennial to do that, the amount of check-ins you have to have with that millennial is astronomically high. So I think it's always a fun little experiment. If you have these two different generations on your team, do it. Let's try it. I think it's fun to see how that works out. But you'll laugh and you'll remember the slide when you think about that piece of the puzzle. Good. Okay. The next one, so I've lumped together millennials and Gen Z, again, just with the communication piece and think about this. It's very, very easy for us to remember. Think instant communication, think positive affirmations. They love the constant communication and the feedback. They want consistent feedback to know that they're completing the project in the correct way. Pam, you mentioned this. Am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? Yes. There are ways that you guys can set expectations to where you can minimize that. It just takes a little more work on the front end. And then similar to Xers, they like the informal ad hoc conversations, maybe because they like the positive affirmations. But what you'll notice is back to the team-centric piece of millennials and the Gen Zs, they really, really, really work well together in teams. They like to have that informality. So that's when you'll notice that the Xers and the millennials get along quite well in the workplace. You just might drive the Xers nuts if the millennials are continuing to ask if they're doing okay. And a lot of that can be squashed with this good expectation setting and project charters. Say, this is where we have to go. You have the freedom. You can do it. You got this. And then setting that, and then off they go. They will need more check-ins than Xers, there's no doubt. But you can limit some of those opportunities. Okay, fantastic. Keep moving along. So now, guys, we're getting out of communication. Let's talk about feedback. So now we're saying, okay, this is how you kind of communicate with these guys. If we're thinking about feedback, so I have to give feedback to these different generations, how do I do it? I know in your brains, you guys are probably thinking about performance reviews, probably just pop straight in. You can use that as an example. So let's think about what does this mean? So for boomers, again, you guys will see this theme, think schedule. Make sure it's scheduled, it's on the calendar. They know what's going on. What you'll notice is annual performance reviews are ideal for boomers. So why is that? Annual performance reviews or biennial performance reviews allows the boomer the freedom to do what they need to do to achieve the goals. Remember, this generation loves achievement. They love to achieve things, knock things off their list. So when you do these annual reviews, it's really giving them the floor to shine. Hey, show me everything you did this year. I'd love to hear more about it. Kind of walk me through it. And if you do that, I mean, it's phenomenal to watch with this generation. They really, really like that formality of let me have time to show you to do this. Pull out the action plan, go line by line in the clear roadmap. That kind of gets back to my performance review example. Sit down, show them. Let them walk you through exactly what they did. How did they get there? They'll show you the roadmap. And what you'll notice is you're deriving a lot of wisdom to yourself as the manager, and you're also creating a roadmap for how it should be done in the future. Now, yes, okay, we can streamline some things. We can maybe get things more efficient, but allowing boomers to do this with you will really, really, really set you in a good direction as a company or as a manager. And I find this to be very beneficial. Face-to-face feedback is how I prefer. Never, ever, ever do any meetings like a performance review with the boomer over the phone or over Teams. I would tell never do that. I actually tell you never do that in general. I think it's just not a good practice, but especially for the baby boomer. And then stay away from ad hoc conversations. It's a bit stronger than I think it says here. What if you compared the way I like to compare this is if you had a millennial, a Z, an Xer, and a boomer all lined up in offices together, and you popped by each one of those offices, the one that's going to be the most resistant to popping by would probably, again, I'm talking general terms, guys, would probably be the boomer, and then you work your way to Gen Z. Even though X is very open to it too. So just, yes, you can have ad hoc with them, but if they're really locked in, really on a set schedule, just kind of make sure you give them the opportunity to say, can I schedule a meeting with you? Can I talk about this? Are you available now for this? Right? Kind of asking me more for permission on the front end. Okay. This one, so delivering feedback, especially if it's negative feedback, just do with honesty, be authentic, be upfront and cut to the chase. This is the generation that can take negative feedback to the best of any of the generations, and it's not even close. And that shows you that you can get right to the point. This is what happened. We gotta get better. Please do it like this way, right? You don't have to worry about dancing around and doing the sandwich technique with the boomers. You can really get right to it, and you won't find a lot of defensiveness or them combating, which you will find with the other generations, right? So keep that in mind, guys, when we're doing it. We don't want to. It would be good to, kind of level off the positives and the negatives, but with this generation, you can really cut to the chase. All right. So before we get off boomers, what do we think? Makes sense? You guys understand it? Kind of tying all the way back together with all the previous feedback we've heard? Head nods, Jason. Yeah.
I think my experience is different with giving feedback with boomers. Because I feel like I don't know if it's the boomers or the Gen Xers that introduced the sandwich method of the positive, negative, positive, but I find that works best with really all generations. In my experience, the cutting to the chase hasn't really always been the most effective.
No, that's a good point. And Jason, I appreciate you saying that. And that's a really important piece to say. The positive, negative, positive works for almost every single generation. What you may get if you do that with a boomer is an eye roll or two, right? Because they know what you're doing. They know what you're up to. So they may see it as unauthentic, I should say. So the honesty piece in getting there, it doesn't mean you have to just railroad them right into it, but you have to just make sure they understand the why and the how you get there. And I agree with you, and each person's different too, right, Jason? I think that's a part that we've been saying this whole entire time, depending on which generation you're from. That's awesome. Good. Okay, so Gen X, guys, again, you'll keep seeing this independence piece. So think independence as you're giving feedback to these Xers. They don't need as much feedback as millennials. We'll talk about millennials in a second. They work on their own to get things done. And if feedback is too often or specific, they start tying together that with micromanaging. So just be careful about that, right? We kind of say, give it to them, let them go, and come back in a week or two. That's the way you want to think about, especially as giving feedback to them as well. You don't want to bombard them with positive praise or something like this because they're going to say, why are you doing that? Like, I don't need this, right? But this isn't what's going on. Are you okay? But you got to make sure that you're just continuing to let them do their own thing, get it done, and make sure you're monitoring how much feedback you're giving Gen Xers. And again, we talked about this, guys, linking actionable feedback to the organization and employees' future strengths and weaknesses. Here's an example. I see that you're always spending extra time to understand the client's needs. This not only helps our team, but also is a great asset to your career, organization, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just trying and even informal feedback to try to tie those pieces together with Gen Xers always really helps them too. Not just saying, hey, great job, you rocked it. Well, you rocked it because this could end up in more sales, or this could help us with bolstering relationships. It could help us get more members into the chamber. Things like this is like kind of how you have to think about the structuring of the Gen Xers when you're giving them feedback. On the flip side of this, delivering negative feedback, always doing a holistic approach. So saying, Joey, I want to discuss the issue with your data. Those numbers being off impacted the bottom line and reported to shareholders. Next time, please triple check. So again, even when you're giving negative feedback, not, hey, your data's not good and it's really bad. It's, hey, your data's really bad. And the reason it's bad is because I was actually not able to report to the shareholders right. They got upset with me. I'm in hot water, so next time, please triple check. That's a good technique to use for all generations, in my opinion, but specifically for Gen Xers, is make sure you're always kind of tying it back to why and what's the bigger picture there. Okay, before I get off the Xers, any comments? Okay, silence is in agreement. All right, so millennials, hopping into millennials, they grew up receiving overwhelmingly positive feedback or feedback in general. Remember that, okay? The traditional 2 times a year performance reviews do not work. It's not enough time for them. It's not frequent enough. It's not the praise or the affirmations. Something you have to remember is, rightfully or wrongfully so, it is overwhelmingly positive. So in order to keep your millennials on track, you need to make sure you're checking in. Now, I would tell you best practice is to have one-on-ones with all your direct reports anyways. And during those meetings, just make sure you're keeping them online, you're keeping them paced up with where they need to go with their goals, bring them back up, talk through them. Hey, good job, keep it going, and continuing to do this on some sort of regular cadence. That way, the 2 times a year performance reviews shouldn't be shocking to them. They should know exactly where they stand at any given time. And again, I would make that argument. You should do that with all generations, just to always keep them on tack. But especially for the millennials and the Gen Z, that's really, really, really important to do, that you have some sort of constant feedback loop. And you tend to give them more positive affirmations than other generations. And if you do, guys, you will see millennials perform quite nicely, really exceeding your expectations. This is something that we have to understand with this generation. Again, take advantage of everyday moments. So if you're walking out of a meeting, you can say something like, I heard you did a great job on that project last week. When would be a good time to discuss and give more feedback about that project? See how nice that was? It's immediate, right after they got done presenting, and I want to talk to you more about it later. So you keep them really enticed. Oh yeah, awesome, I did a good job. I can't wait to talk more about it. I can think about it now as a millennial. I won't get blocked in my brain. Did I do a good job? Oh, I didn't do a good job. That person didn't tell me I did a good job. My manager didn't say I did a good job. I must have written really bad. And then the spiraling effect happens, and you have to just be careful with the millennials on that. That will happen. And Pam, you're probably laughing because you've seen this. This happens much more with this generation than any previous generation.
How did you know, Austin? I was chuckling.
I could tell. Us HR folks, right? We see it all. So that's a good point of this for the millennial piece. So let's keep that in mind, guys. Gen Z, the newest one, guys, and as I was putting this deck together and updating the slides for Gen Z, it's been really interesting to see the differences between millennials, Gen Z, and Xers and boomers. You got to be direct and actionable. Make sure you have examples. So what you saw with the millennials, you did a good job, man. Keep it going. Like, keep going. This one, we have to be direct. So you have to somehow be positive, direct and actionable. And you have to make sure you have examples. Millennials don't necessarily always need examples. It's kind of funny, but you think they would. But this Gen Z is almost reverting backwards into the boomers or the Xers train of thought of saying, well, can I get an example of what you mean by that? Can you please provide an example of when you see this? The biggest thing I see get tripped up with millennials and the Z with managers are they will give these overarching themes to people. Like, no, they didn't do a good job. Well, why didn't they do a good job? Where didn't they do a good job? Do you have an example of this? It's wildly important for Gen Z to understand why. And you can make the argument that all generations want that, because I'd be quite frank, I think that's really good to understand the when and how, and can you tell me exactly what I did wrong? But these guys really demand it. Make it more frequent and timely, just like millennials. You'll see that very similar feedback. These guys are going to want even more than millennials. So pings, texts, whatever it may be, the positive feedback or negative feedback, and you got to balance between constructive and positive. Gen Z is an interesting one. They didn't have such wild helicopter parents as the millennials did, probably because some of these guys were raised by millennials and they remember those days. So you can actually balance the constructive and positive feedback a little bit better as you can with millennials, just the way they were raised. And so you're watching this pendulum swing of feedback, of positivity and negative, or being blunt. And it's fascinating to watch it kind of come back the other way with this generation around the constructive piece of this puzzle. Yes, you still have positive messages in there, but you can open it up a little bit more on the constructive side. Then you have to watch out for the millennials. Focus on growth. Gen Z is big on this, so is millennials, but Gen Z particularly. Again, remember I talked about skill acquisition. That's what they mean. How do I continue to grow? How do I continue to grow? How do I continue to grow? And you just have to make sure you keep that in front of them. Like, hey, this is what's going on. You could think about an informal or a formal development plan. Where do you want to go? Have career conversations, let them speak through it, develop that, and then obviously encourage collaboration. This is one that we have to watch out for Gen Z with them being so technologically advanced. We have to make sure that we're encouraging collaboration with them and for them, meaning you have to kind of get them out in these team centers. They aren't as strong as millennials with the team centric focus. They're a little bit more reserved in their own ways. Again, probably due to the iPhone or the like. So keep that in mind as you're giving this feedback to Gen Z. Okay, so with that, I'm going to pause. Any feedback on millennial Z X boomers? Anything that stood out to you at all before I move forward? All right, all right, all right. And guys, ultimately what it comes down to is this thing. You guys have probably heard it's called WIFM, right? That's a kind of a funny word, but it's really what's in it for me. Keep that mindset. So what they're going to say is you got to treat each employee as their own employee, even if they are a part of a specific generation. You have to ask them, like, what motivates you to come to work every day? What do you want to get out of being part of this company? Those are good things to ask any generation to understand and identify where are they, and then using this generational training as a tool to get you there. Because I think Cindy brought it up, Dan brought it up. There are a lot of folks that tween between two different generations, and you have to make sure you understand them specifically as a human being and what they were exposed to, not just rely on generational training to get you there. You have to understand what their motivators are, what is it, and what's in it for them. And the only way you can do that is by having these career conversations with it, right? And then identifying each of it with the employees, writing it down, and then deciding, can I develop this person to this? What can I do? What can the company do to make sure that we retain them, we keep going this way? And again, here's an example. The millennial employee wants a promotion. You tell them to co-lead a team so they're learning while they're working towards that promotion, right? So when you understand what they want, you can then figure out what can I do to make that make sense. So if a millennial comes to you, I want a promotion, I want the next big job. We say, okay, what are some of the gaps you have? Well, you haven't led a team. You haven't had exposure. So guess what? Go lead a team. I don't know what project it is. Find a project to completion and then come holler at me. It's a bit twofold because you're helping the millennial in this example get the experience. You're also delaying any kind of compensation adjustment or promotion because they haven't quite earned it yet, right? So you're taking this, it's a win for the company, it's a win for you as a manager, and it's a win for the employee because you're getting a better employee. They're acquiring skills, and you're doing it to where you're being a good steward to your company and making sure that the compensation piece is taken care of appropriately. So a little bit there. So WIFM, if you guys can remember that, WIFM, what's in it for me? And last but not least, guys, assess the goals. Have they achieved them, yes or no? And compensation to come back and do it. So with that being said, it's been crazy. It's already been an hour and 15 minutes. I want to pause here. That was this section of the generational training. We have a pretty beefy section next time too. This next time we're going to start talking about perceptions, maybe some generalizations. The most important part of next time is talking about career development and compensation for the different generations. So more on that side of the house, development, retention of these employees. How do you retain them? What are some good techniques you guys can use, deploy today if you'd like? And that'll be the final, I guess you'd say final part of the series for generational training. So with that being said, I'd love to open it up for questions. Any thoughts, anything that's kind of occurred to you, any feedback would be great.
So Austin, it's not a question, but comment, I guess. I guess
Sure.
the challenge here is to be able to identify but not evaluate. So, it's as you're crossing different generations, it goes both ways. The employee, I guess, has to understand, where their supervisor's coming from if they're not in that same generation, and vice versa. So it's not necessarily like it's easy to just evaluate and say, well, they're just, I don't know what's wrong with them. But to, be able to identify so that there's an appreciation for how you may be saying something or approaching something in a way that to you is very comfortable, but to them may not be.
It's a great point, Dan. I appreciate you saying that. I know we mentioned it a couple times. It's not stereotyping the person and just saying that's just how they are. That's an easy cop out. You have to understand the what's in it for them and who they are as an individual. This training is designed to get you guys to think and understand how does this interact either with your folks or with your people manager or your boss or your executive team to try to help understand how can I get some of these, how can I be successful in the workplace, understanding the way they were raised and what they saw to make it a more collaborative team at the end of the day, right? I mean, that's the end goal. That's a good point, Dan. I appreciate you mentioning that. All right, what else we got? Nancy, what do you think?
Oops, I figured out how to unmute myself. Sorry. I think it's very interesting. I didn't get to see the first session, so I'm excited to go back and watch it. But I think a lot of it was nailing it on the head, especially I'm a Gen Xer, love the Breakfast Club, thank you. And I felt like yeah, I was definitely feeling it as you were going over things. So yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you. It's good to hear.
Hi, this is Cindy Dingeldine, and I don't say much, but I have enjoyed listening to both the sessions. And I think I'm sitting here wondering, how do I take this information and somehow present it to our small office of 10 that is comprised of 4 generations that works collaboratively together in architecture and design? And at the end of this, all your sessions, I would like to see if there's a way to condense it down to something that would be friendly to present to that kind of a group that, you know, is a one session, really manageable kind of discussion.
Perfect. I appreciate the kind words, Cindy. Yeah, absolutely. I'd be more than willing to have that conversation with you and say, hey, what does this look like? How do you do it?
Yeah.
It's a lot of content. I think it's designed that way, but there are ways to skinny it out. So you're not sitting there for 4 hours and you're banging your head against the wall because there's so much content. But yeah, I'd love to have that conversation, Cindy. Thank you for the feedback.
Sure.
All right. Anybody else before we wrap up?
I think the other challenge, Austin, is on top of this, then you have individual personalities. So, like you said, you can't really stereotype the people into categories, because there are things that have shaped them to become who they are today. But at the same time, so has their daily life. So then you add on top of this, somebody whose personality may be almost contradictory to the generation they represent. So it's, I can understand where Cindy's coming from. It's like my head's spinning just a little bit. Because even in a small staff, like we have a small staff at the chamber too, every individual is extremely different, and we try to recognize that, but it does come out sometimes when, we're working collaboratively on a project or whatever, and, what everybody thinks is important in that project is very different depending on the individual.
That point can't be echoed enough, Dan. I mean, I think I totally agree with you. That's the hardest part. And I know Pam was probably giggling a little bit here as well, because it is so wildly different between each employer, each person, each team member. And that's why that with them statement really helps you say, what's in it for me? What's in it for them? Let's start there. And then let's kind of bolt on the generational training, right? Say, okay, now am I seeing some of these things because of this, because of that? And having that deeper thought, once you have those career conversations, I mean, that's exactly right. You understand the individual at the basic level.
Austin, I just want to chime in and say that, kudos to you for tackling a lot of these topics and putting it together in a training such as this, because, these it can be, as you know, from an HR perspective, can be very touchy and, very, energizing. People can take offense to being classified in certain blocks and stuff like that. But I think, Cindy, to your point of trying to wrap this up and deliver it to your team is, part of something that we all as HR people, try to do in a way that will be informative, but not necessarily directional like orders, because some people say, well, it came from HR, you have to do this type of thing. Now, this is just, it's an educational type format. And, these are challenges to where I think as managers, you have some that are in positions that struggle with having those one-on-one conversations, but yet they're in managerial roles themselves. So, it's up to the individual to kind of know their strengths and weaknesses and gain support from those that can help with that tough conversation.
Well said, Dan.
So, Austin, I think you did a fantastic job yet again.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. The positive affirmations for millennials are. All right, guys. If there's no other questions, and if you guys do, you have them driving home or whatever it may be, feel free to reach out. Absolutely willing to have that conversation with you. I am flying this week. I'm in San Diego, so I'm on a different time zone, but always more than welcome to have those conversations. And if you don't have anything, let Dan know. Dan's got all my information, personal, regular cell, email. He knows how to get a hold of me. All right. All right, guys. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk soon. Talk next month. See ya.